On the international stage, there are some developments as well, as the United States have made some serious changes with the inauguration of Donald Trump in terms of the relations between Western countries in between each other with the United States. The United States have introduced two significant changes. One of those is Donald Trump's interest in Greenland and the Panama Canal, and how this threatens the United States' relations with Europe, as well as his rhetoric towards Canada as the 51st United States state. And there we see some tension between United States and Canada as well. Donald Trump has also introduced additional changes, such as what is practically a trade war, where the United States have introduced a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, as well as a 10% tariff on China. At the same time, he also talks about an impending tariff on the EU. He's also talking about a potential tariff on the United Kingdom. And from there, we see that there are several layers of tariffs that would be introduced with this, which includes tariffs on every single one of the major allies of the United States within the North Atlantic Ocean area. There's been no talks about the tariffs on any of the US allies in the Pacific, only in the Western nations of Europe, Canada, and Mexico. At the same time, Donald Trump is trying to change the NATO quota of 2% GDP to 5% of the GDP in defense spending. And this is a significant increase for major NATO countries such as Germany and France. France is already spending about 1.5% of their GDP, and Macron just today announced that they would now double it to 3% of their GDP, or 100 billion euros every year. Germany is also talking about increasing their defense spending, but they say 5% is unrealistic, as 5% of their GDP would be approximately 35 to 40% of the German national budget. That is not something they can afford to change overnight, much less in probably a decade would be realistic for it to be changed, and even then it would increase taxes, it would reduce spending in other areas, and generally it would heavily impact the German economy. Therefore, my theory is twofold. There's a theory for the Canadian and Mexican tariffs, and then there's a theory for the European tariffs. For the United States tariffs on Canada and Mexico, it is to pressure them into political changes with regards to border control, immigration, and generally cooperating with the United States on regulating the borders. It is also a strategy for the United States to stop the reducing of the industrial capacity of the United States, because as it is right now, United States companies are moving towards Mexico and Canada, from where they can get cheaper workforce that produce the same stuff and then export it to the United States. So they use less money to produce. For example, vehicles is one of the major producers, is the vehicles being exported from Mexico to the United States, and that is due to lower costs in Mexico, and then they export it to the United States. What the tariffs would do would be to increase the price of these vehicles, therefore blocking the selling of these vehicles being exported from Mexico, which would then make the American-made cars more competitive in terms of pricing. This would send more Americans to buy American-made cars instead of Mexican-made cars, and therefore the companies would want to return to the United States, which would then re-establish the industrial capacity of the United States. So this would be a long-term economic growth tactic where the return of industries would return to the United States rather than abroad, where they can get cheaper workforce. The issue with this is that the United States pricing is not competitive even with a 25% tariff, and at the same time they are imposing these tariffs on sovereign countries which can make their own decisions, and this would alienate these countries from the United States. What we're seeing is that the United States is really flaunting their muscles, saying, well, we are the United States, we can really do whatever we want, and you're now being forced to do what we want because we are the United States. In terms of Europe, the plan here is to pressure European countries to spend their own money on the military-industrial complex. This would inevitably give the United States military-industrial complex some more orders, as a 5% GDP spending would need to be spent somewhere, and the United States military-industrial complex would have a lot more new orders, F-35 jets being sold, tanks, air defense, everything can be sold. With the industry re-entering the United States, they'll be able to meet those orders, and the United States sees economic growth. At the same time, I do not believe that the United States actually wants Greenland. Instead, I believe that the threats towards Greenland is a either-or scenario for Europe, because Europe stands together in this issue that they want to refuse the United States takeover from Greenland because Denmark is a European Union member state. What we are seeing is that currently the United States is exerting pressure on Greenland. They want to gain control over Greenland, is what they say. The purpose of which is for national security and economic growth, because there's a lot of minerals in Greenland, and it is strategically important placement in terms of the Arctic, and the Russian movement of ships in the area has been seen a lot, especially submarines and Arctic vessels, while the United States also claims Chinese ships, yet there's been little to no sightings of Chinese ships, but that's besides the point. The point is, the United States claims it is important for national security of the United States and for economic growth that the United States gain control over Greenland. However, the issue with this story is that the agreement between the United States and Denmark with regards to Greenland is that the United States is able to build as many military bases really as they want, have such a large military presence in the peninsula as they want. They can even invest in the mining of the natural resources of Greenland. So these points negate the arguments from the United States. I believe instead what the United States is trying to say is, Europe, you're currently spending way less than 5% of your GDP on NATO, on your militaries, therefore you're below the NATO requirements. If you do not start spending those 5% of the GDP, then I'll just take control over Greenland and I'll abandon you to the fate of Russia, China, or whoever wants to invade Europe. Therefore, it is a carrot and a stick kind of situation where they just bring two sticks. You either spend 5% of the GDP and face tariffs, or we take Greenland and you face tariffs either way. So the tariffs is sort of a introduction to what the United States is showing the European Union, and that is that there will be a complete change in the relationship between the United States and Europe. The United States will now be moving on to a position of clear hierarchy, where the United States is above Europe. And if Europe does not pull its weight, then they will be subservient to the United States. That is what the United States is saying. The United States can now take whatever land they want from Europe. They can take whatever decisions they want without consulting Europe. And they can do whatever they want as long as Europe does not pull its own weight. And this is why France is really quick to double its military spending despite the economic issues there is in France. And that is because they want to be on equal footing with the United States rather than being subservient to them. And at the same time, now that the United States under Donald Trump is acting as it is, then it is not secure for European countries to rely on them for defense, and therefore they need to pull their own weight either way. And therefore, we'll likely see a significant remilitarization in Europe, where there may be tax increases to fund these 5 GDP goals. We may see a reintroduction of conscription or the increasing of conscription in European member states, as they would need to man the positions that will open with a 5% GDP spending. We also see a lot more expenditures going to the military-industrial complex. The biggest benefiters of this would be South Korea, as they have a strong military-industrial complex. Israel, they can export weapons to Europe as well. The United States itself, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Other countries also have their own military-industrial complexes, but they do not have the capacity to serve what they would need. And even these countries would be hard-pressed to produce as much as the orders would be needed. We currently see that there is a backlog on Javelins, F-35s, and many other equipment that the United States is building and creating that expands 10 years already. Therefore, the current change would increase the investment into the United States military-industrial complex to build new factories and to expand. Same with Germany, France, United Kingdom, Israel, and South Korea, being the 5 biggest winners in this. While the biggest losers are naturally all European countries that are part of NATO, that would have to spend a lot more money on the military-industrial complex and imports from these countries that build weapons, whereas they instead could have used that money on welfare or investments in civilian industry, which they have been doing since the fall of the Soviet Union, which had fostered significant economic growth. In conclusion, with Trump ascending the throne of the United States, we see that the situation has drastically changed in the Western Hemisphere. The United States is taking up a position of power, and they are flexing their muscles as they want to set the ground stage for a completely changed world order, where the United States intends to defend its hegemony, and a new military arms race may begin between NATO, Russia, and China. This would naturally increase the spending in military weapons for the rest of the countries in the world, and we are slowly walking into a third world war, where we'll now have the necessary weapons to really destroy the planet. And that is going to be all for this video. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.